Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I'm going to be talking about specifically Index Card RPG, and these are the story events that happened within the Index Card RPG one-shot that I recently ran, which was F14A Tomcat U.S. Navy fighter jets from 1986 against a dragon. So that was the structure of the one-shot that I ran. And these story events are specifically what happened after the player characters decided not to assist another U.S. Navy pilot in escorting out a U.S. Merchant Marine cargo ship from the red zone within Russian waters, and decided to go through a portal made by their doppelganger wizards, wizard navigators, into Thracion, specifically to stop the dragon Venanguius safe that had been prophesied 2 years previous to destroy the city of Silm, destroy the city of Spire in the kingdom of Silm on the world of Thracion. Okay. All right, so our story events begin with the U.S. Navy, with the doppelganger wizards, who are doppelgangered as U.S. Navy navigators. They open up portals to they open up portals specifically to Thracion, and all 5 of the player characters, each being their player character being a U.S. Navy pilot flying an F14A Tomcat, specifically from U.S. 1986. They go through the portal. Okay, now the moment that hits, that triggers a whole number of events that I have planned as the dungeon master, and I've planned, sequence by sequence by sequence, things that they're going to have to get through. Even to just get to the dragon. All right. So the first thing they do is they come through, and when they went through on the Earth side, it was a night, a clear night. They could see the moon sparkling off the water below in the ocean. When they come through into Thracion, immediately they're surrounded by thunderstorms. It's raining, and they're in an area of heightened lightning. Right, and so immediately they're in danger. But the first immediate check is not a lightning check or storms checks. The first check that they had to do was to actually determine their orientation. Because when they came through the portals, it actually changed. It had the possibility of changing the orientation for their planes, right? So the first thing I had them do was make a flying check, right? Which they had to do with their dex attribute. And this was to see if they realized what their orientation was. But before I even had them make that check, one of the players said, I'm going to do a monitoring check. I'm going to check all my instruments and make sure I know where my plane is and what condition my plane is. So that person automatically did not need to roll that orientation check. And I even told them, and then the rest of the players did have to make that orientation check. It came out, and it came through, and all of them were able to tell their orientation, and 2 of the flyers were orientated upside down to the ground, right? So they're above ground on Thracion, and 2 of them, their orientation was that their cockpit was to the sky, and 2 of them was that their cockpit was to the ground, right? And a lot of players were like, well, how's that a problem? I was like, well, and then I had to explain. So it's always interesting in my games, because we have multi-generational games. We have people who are my age, and then people who are like millennials, right? And I kind of explained, well, do you guys know how one of the Kennedy sons died? So one of the Kennedy sons in our world, actually died in a plane crash, and a lot of people think that, and he was just flying over the ocean, and a lot of people think that's exactly what happened, was that he orientated his plane upside down and was not aware of it, right? So that can happen when you're flying. So that was fun, and it was just something, something that came out of the Reacher, just making sure that they knew what their orientation was, and it also, communicated to the players immediately, like you're in a different world now, like you literally don't know up from down, right? And so, and then so everybody corrected their orientation, right, and flipped to the right side so that their canopy so that their cockpit was facing toward the sky, right? So they're all screaming toward it, and the next thing they had to do was, I said, you guys are, and then immediately, so one player, which was Dom, said, hey, I'm checking all my instruments, I'm making sure I know the state of my airplane, which means he didn't even have to make a check for the orientation issue, right? Second, and if anybody had not made that check or failed that check, there was a chance that, when they said, I'm going to pull up, they would have dove right into the ground, right? So, again, one of the things that was starting to become very clear right away was that this is a very deadly situation, right? So, Dom, immediately got rid of that. And then like just another turn after that, I said, okay, you guys are in this thunderstorm, so you actually have to make another flying check in order to not be struck by lightning as you're flying through these thunderstorms, right? Now, right prior, before I said that, one of the other players was like, I'm immediately flying over the clouds, right? So it was very interesting that now this group did have a flight leader. The group chose the flight leader themselves. There was a vote, and it took a long time, and there was some complaining overall, by one or two players. But the group was able to determine who their leader would be amongst themselves. The leader was determined to be Alyssa. So Alyssa was the flight crew leader. Was the leader of the flight. The flight is a small group of fighter jets, right? All right. So, normally you would think the word squadron, but that's not technically right. There's a lot of jargon for the military, of course. So what was happening? So essentially, the next check that needed to be made was to see if they would be struck by lightning, right? One of the players did not need to make that because they immediately flew over the clouds. Now, unbeknownst to that player, that immediately made all checks from the Dragon against that player easy, right? If the Dragon saw you coming in, all checks from the Dragon were, to attack you, were easy for the Dragon, right? All right, now the player did not know that at the time, right? So one player, and that was Ted, flies above the clouds. All the rest of the players have to make a check in order to see if they're going to be struck by lightning. Every single player made that check and took no damage whatsoever from the lightning itself. One of the things that was really interesting was that was meant to be more dramatic. And what would have happened is the planes have different systems on them, right? So they have 4 separate weapon systems. They have the Phoenix long-range missiles, they have the Sidewinder medium-range missiles, and they had homing missiles on them, and they had a Vulcan machine gun. So if they had been struck by lightning, they would have lost 1, and I would have just rolled 1d4, and they would have lost functionality on one of those weapon systems, right? So at this point, they've come through. There's the orientation check. The next thing there is the lightning check. And then at that point, they actually come through. And at this point, they have the opportunity to begin making attacks, right? And so because the navigators are with them, I explained, you guys are aware of, the navigators have been, are your doppelganger wizards. They know exactly where the Dragon is. None of you can see the Dragon at this point, but your long-range missiles can target the Dragon. Even though you can't see the Dragon, you could target the Dragon, right? So you guys can begin attacking now, right? And so the first person to attack was Mike. He actually, and then, so then I said, okay, you're going to attack. You're going to use your long-range missiles, which made it just capable for him to attack, right? I had set the difficulty number on as a 9 for the entire scene. That's the way Index Card RPG works. So, and then I said, do you want to fire one of your long-range missiles or two of your long-range missiles? And it was fun because, everybody, there was like this discussion at the table where we only have one, we only have two, so we have to be frugal. Or like, no, I'm going to use them both. So he used them both, right? And I think this set the pace for the entire fight in that he fired both missiles, right? And he made, and he used, it was one attack for both missiles. But so he just rolled 1d20, right? So he hits the dragon with both missiles with one attack because they're both using the same targeting, right? But when he rolls damage, each of the missiles does damage separately. Now the way that that damage is done within that index card RPG, it's beautiful. It's absolutely brilliant. If you are punching somebody, it's D4. So an unarmed attack is D4. If you use any weapon, it's a D6, right? So a long range aim missile does D6 damage on a dragon, which has 5 hearts, which is 50 HP, right? So he gets to roll 2d6 against the dragon, right? Now, I told them, okay, there needs to be some distinction on these weapons, right? Now, Index Card RPG flattens distinction on weapons, right? But these are like long-range missiles from a U.S. fighter jet. This needs to do something more than D6 damage, right? And so it does. Against the dragon, it hits with such force that it has a 5% chance of knocking that dragon unconscious, right? And so every time somebody hits the dragon with one of the missiles, it is actually going to cause, it'll give the players a chance to roll a d20, and if they hit a natural 20, they knock the dragon unconscious, and the dragon will fall out of the sky onto the ground unconscious, right? So at that point, the player gets to roll. So the player rolled like 7 points of damage between the 2d6s, and then rolled 2 checks to knock the dragon unconscious. And he rolled 2d20s. If he got a 20 on either one, it would have knocked the dragon unconscious. He did not knock the dragon unconscious, right? Okay? So at this point, we're going forward, right? So he fails to knock the dragon unconscious. The next person in the to fire was Bill. So Bill gets excited and does exactly the same attack as, Mike does, right? He hits with both missiles. Does like another 12 points, I think, right? And, just hammers the dragon with both missiles, making the 9 he needs. Now, to make this 9, most of the player characters had chosen to put 2 points into their dexterity. So they needed to roll a 7 to make this, to make this hit, right? And if they had rolled a 20 on the attack roll, they would have got to roll their d6, and they would have got to roll their ultimate, which is a d12. Okay, so it was really, so right out of the gate, this dragon's in trouble, and I was okay with that because these are long range missiles from F14 Tomcats. Like literally, each one of these missiles costs like $600,000. Like it's $500,000. So when they're shooting 2 long-range missiles, that is a $1 million attack. It's like 1.2 million. I was like, holy cow, this is incredible, right? So it was really, and by the way, I had a blast doing the research for the F14 Tomcats doing this game. It was really, really fun. So he hits the target, right? Now at this point, I explained to them, okay, you're all, of course, your F14A Tomcats are all on approach. They're moving very quickly. You guys punch through the clouds, and you punch through the clouds, and immediately there's a mountain range, and you either have to fly over the mountain range, or you have to fly through the mountain range, Millennium Falcon, Han Solo style, turn your plane sideways, zip, zip, zip through the mountain range, right? And I said, now, everybody, all you got to do is just pull your plane up. You'll be above the mountain range. You can fly right over it, right? And I told Ted, you don't even need to make this roll because you're already cruising above. You pulled above the clouds. Your plane is already above the mountains, right? So, but I slowed it down, and this is my favorite part of Index Card RPG, and this is one of the reasons why I run Index Card RPG. There's no ability to do what I'm about to tell you in Dungeons & Dragons. And I said, okay, listen. You are flying through these mountains. If you decide to fly through the mountains, you will be flying through the mountains, right? Han Solo, Millennium Falcon style, 1 feet between you and 1 foot, between you and rock, right? If you fail your check, there will be 1 check for this. If you make your check, you will punch through, you will be completely unseen from the dragon, and you will then be in sight of the dragon, and your first attack against the dragon will be easy because you will be ambushing the dragon. If you fail this roll, there is no damage roll, you die. Here's what happens. Your player character dies, your doppelganger wizard dies, and your F14 Tomcat is destroyed in a hail of metal wreckage, right? And so it was really, really, interesting. And so everybody's like, oh boy, and so now one of the things that's nice is you're running a one-shot, right? So, but I also told everybody, listen, we're still, now this was a 2.5 hour game. We're about an hour and 15 minutes in the game, about halfway through, right? And so I told him also, listen, if you die, all right, I already have planned for a way for you to continue to participate in the game. Your player character will be dead, but you will have a character that you will be able to use for the rest of the game, right? And I did plan that out, and I'll tell you what happened. So Ted is free. He doesn't need to make this roll. Dom, Mike, Alyssa, and who else? There was one more person at the table. So Dom, Mike, Alyssa, Ted. Yeah, I guess I had four players. I could have sworn there was one more player at the table. And Bill, sorry. So at this point, Ted is safe. Bill, Mike, Alyssa, and Dom all need to make this check. Every single one of them, all right, had said, I'm going to make the check, right? Now, but Alyssa said immediately, she had done some planning. And earlier, at the very beginning of the game, I said, what are you guys going to do with your navigators? And Alyssa said, I'm going to spend some time with my navigator. My navigator is a wizard, and I am going to assist her in using magical spells to enchant the fighter jet, right? So I'm like, okay. And she's like, what do I get for that, right? And I'm like, okay, that's a great idea. Good planning. What you get for that is the first time she has put essentially an armor spell on your plane. The first time your plane is struck and takes any damage whatsoever, that damage is completely negated. So you get a free hit, like the first time your fighter jet is struck. Now, right before she made the roll to see if her player character would die, right? Because she elected to fly through the mountain range, right? She said, listen, hey, before I make this roll, I have that magical armor. If I fail my roll, can I use that magical armor to completely reduce that killing damage? And I said, yes, absolutely. Of course, that magical armor will be gone then, but if you fail this roll, you will be able to do that, right? So that's exactly what happened. So Alyssa starts, she rolls, she fails, right? And she says, I'm using my magical armor. I get through the mountains. And I said, yes, you indeed you do. You have passed the check. Bill makes his check. Bill makes his roll. He makes the check. He is alive. Dom makes his roll. He rolls the dice, makes his check. He is safe. He is alive. Mike makes his roll, fails his check, and he is the first casualty of the game. His character dies, right? And it was quite shocking. And everybody at the table was like, oh no, right? And he's like, oh man. And he was frustrated because, you could tell he's really frustrated. So I'm incredibly blessed. I have very, very incredibly valuable players. Each of my players, when they are taking the time to play in a game, it's a big deal. Like, they're all interrupting school. They're all interrupting time with family. They're all interrupting actual real life goals in order to be there, and you could tell he was frustrated and hurt, and like, I'll tell you, death is hard in tabletop role-playing games. Death is truly hard. This was just a one-shot, but I could tell he was frustrated, right? Now, I hate that Mike's character, Mike as a player is frustrated he's going to get demoted. And so immediately I said, "That's okay. You will now be controlling a Griffin Knight," right? And so I pull out this Griffin Knight, which is a non-player character. It has stats. It's completely statted out, and it is an elf on a griffin, and it has a special spear that does triple ultimate damage if you hit the dragon, which is very effective. But but one swipe from the dragon and you die because you're not in, because the dragon will kill you with one swipe in this game, right? And he's like, "Oh, okay, thanks." He did not seem impressed, right? And it's just, it was really, it's very tough, right? So one, I hate seeing players' characters die, even in a one shot. I just want to talk about it for a minute here. I could have changed that outcome. I could have fudged those dice. I do not ever fudge dice in my games, and I think, and one of the reasons why is I'm just a firm believer. There's no bitter without the sweet, right? There's no sweet without the bitter, and I really feel that the possibility of player character death has to exist in every game. It's just absolutely critical. So it was really painful seeing one of my players, as frustrated as they were, but I also really feel that there needs to be consequences for if you're going to reward, if there's going to be glory for your character's achievements, there needs to be consequence when there's failure, right? And so it was big. So that is still just more part of the story, right? And so and that was the first player character death. They all punched through, all the living characters punched through on the other side, and now Ted and Alyssa and Dom, and Bill are alive. Mike is dead. They punch through and they see the dragon. And in my next video, I'll tell you what their actual engagement with the dragon at medium and close range looked like. Thank you very much.